I've seen my CIA file. I've seen my FBI file. Under the American Freedom of Information Act, I was legally allowed to see both files. The CIA opened my mail. The FBI had a file on me. I've seen both. And I was told the house was being watched and that eventually my house would be hit, my files would be opened, my papers would be taken. We are living in a computer-programmed reality, and the only clue we have to it is when some variable is changed and some alteration in our reality occurs.
If you're a character in a video game, would you know it? Better question, if you started to figure it out, what would the evidence look like from inside the game? Philip K. Dick asked this exact question in 1977, and what he discovered wasn't theory, it was evidence, and all of it was pointing to the same conclusion. You know his work, even if you don't know his name. Think of the movie Blade Runner. He actually wrote it and predicted The Matrix decades before it came out. But here's what nobody talks about. Philip didn't just discover we're in a simulation. He discovered how to wake up inside it. And the method, he found, isn't mystical, but neurological, and quantum science proves it. This is about collapsing the wave function of your own consciousness. Now I need you to stay with me here, because what I'm about to share with you is going to challenge everything you think you know about reality. And I get it. When you hear the words simulation theory, your mind might immediately go to science fiction movies, or conspiracy theories, or late-night stoner conversations. But what if I told you that the reason you dismiss this idea so quickly is precisely because the simulation doesn't want you to notice it? What if the programming includes a defense mechanism, a kind of mental firewall that makes you laugh at this concept before you can seriously examine it? Because here's what's really happening. You've probably felt it, haven't you? That feeling lately that something is off about reality, or those moments of déjà vu that feel too specific to be just brain misfires, those synchronicities that are too perfectly timed to be coincidence, those times when you're thinking about someone and they call you seconds later, those moments when reality seems to glitch, when time skips, when you walk into a room and forget why, when you remember something that everyone else remembers differently. You've been told these are just quirks of the human brain, memory errors, pattern recognition gone haywire. But what if they're not errors at all? What if they're evidence? Proof that reality is computational, that consciousness is interface and not origin, that the world you're experiencing right now is being rendered in real time based on where you place your attention. Philip spent the last 8 years of his life obsessively documenting this evidence. 8,000 pages of journals called the Exegesis, trying to decode what happened to him in February of 1974, when his consciousness cracked open and he saw behind the curtain. And what he discovered wasn't comfortable. It wasn't reassuring. But it was true. And truth, even uncomfortable truth, is the only thing that actually sets you free. So let me tell you what we're really addressing here today. You feel like something is fundamentally wrong with the way reality operates. You feel like you're stuck in patterns you can't break, like you're watching your life happen on autopilot, like you're trapped in a script you didn't write. You feel powerless, like the universe is happening to you instead of through you. And every self-help book, every motivational speaker, every spiritual teacher tells you that you can change your reality by changing your thoughts. And you try. God, you try so hard. You visualize, you affirm, you meditate, you journal. And sometimes it works for a little while, but then you snap back to the default, back to the old patterns, back to the same struggles. And you wonder what's wrong with you. Why can't you change? Why can't you break free? Here's why. Because you've been trying to change the character in the game instead of recognizing that you're the player. You've been trying to rearrange the furniture in the prison cell instead of realizing the door has always been unlocked. You've been trying to improve your life inside the simulation instead of waking up to the fact that you're the one generating the simulation. And that's what Philip discovered. That's what got him surveilled by the FBI. That's what made him dangerous. Because a population that understands they're not victims of reality, but creators of reality. That's the end of control. That's the end of the empire, as Philip called it. That's the beginning of conscious evolution. And the powers that be, whether you want to call them governments or corporations or just the momentum of unconscious collective programming, they cannot allow that. They cannot allow masses of people to wake up inside the code and realize they have root access. So here's what makes this video different from every other video about simulation theory you've ever watched. We're not going to debate whether we're in a simulation. That question is almost irrelevant. What matters is this: your brain is already creating a complete simulation of reality every single moment. Neuroscience proves this beyond any doubt. You're filtering 400 billion bits of sensory information, down to about 2,000 bits of conscious experience. You've never experienced objective reality. You've only ever experienced your brain's rendering of reality based on your beliefs, your past experiences, your emotional state, your expectations. You're already in a simulation. The simulation is happening inside your skull. And once you understand that, once you really get that, everything changes. Because if you're generating the simulation, you can reprogram it. And that's what we're going to explore today. Not just the philosophical implications, but the actual practices that Philip discovered, that neuroscience confirms, that quantum physics predicts, that will allow you to shift from being an unconscious character running on autopilot to being a conscious player who understands the rules of the game and can play it deliberately. And here's the reframe I need you to understand before we go any deeper. Most people ask, how do we escape the Matrix? Wrong question. The Matrix isn't a prison. It's a training ground. It's a consciousness development simulator. Philip realized near the end of his life that the point isn't to leave. The point is to wake up inside it. To remember that you're not trapped in a simulation. You're the awareness animating the simulation. You're not a character with a backstory. You're the consciousness temporarily focused through this character. And once you make that distinction, once you experientially understand that difference, the simulation doesn't trap you anymore. It becomes a playground, a place of infinite possibility, a canvas for conscious creation. So let me take you back to where this all started for Philip. February 20th, 1974. Philip is living in California. He's broke. He's depressed. He's recently divorced. He's recovering from a dental surgery and taking pain medication. A young woman comes to his door delivering his medication. She's wearing a fish necklace, the ancient Christian symbol, the ichthys. Philip asks her about it, and when she looks him in the eye, something happens that defies every rational explanation. He later describes it as being hit by a beam of pink light, not metaphorically. He says it was a physical beam of coherent information pouring directly into his consciousness, and in that moment, everything changes. His entire sense of identity explodes. He's not just Philip anymore. He's simultaneously someone named Thomas, living in Rome in 50 AD, being persecuted as a Christian, hiding in catacombs, speaking Koine Greek, experiencing memories that are as vivid as his childhood. More vivid, actually. And this isn't a brief flash. This dual consciousness persists for months. He's living in two timelines simultaneously. He's experiencing 1974 California and 50 AD Rome at the same time. Now imagine this happening to you. Imagine your entire identity suddenly fracturing, and you're accessing memories of a life you never lived in a time period you never experienced. What would you do? Would you check yourself into a psychiatric hospital? Would you assume you're having a psychotic break? Would you try to forget it and move on with your life? Philip did none of those things. He investigated. He started documenting everything in journals that would eventually become 8,000 pages called the exegesis. And he spent the rest of his life trying to figure out what happened, trying to find a framework that could explain this experience without dismissing it as mental illness. And here's what breaks my heart about Philip's story. He spent years trying to convince himself he wasn't crazy. Consulting neuroscientists, theologians, physicists, mystics, anyone who might have an explanation. Because the experience was so real, so undeniable, so transformative, that he couldn't just dismiss it. But he also couldn't easily accept it, because accepting it meant accepting that everything he thought he knew about reality was wrong. And the framework he eventually landed on was this: time isn't linear. All moments exist simultaneously. We're not moving through time like a river flowing from past to future. We're switching between channels, between frequencies, between parallel timelines that all exist right now. And in that moment, with the pink beam of light, his consciousness briefly switched to a different broadcast, a different timeline, where he was Thomas living in Rome. He saw behind the interface. He glimpsed the code underneath the desktop icons of everyday reality. But here's the part that still gives me chills. During this period of dual consciousness, Philip's infant son, Christopher, was sick. The doctors couldn't figure out what was wrong. They were running tests, but nothing was conclusive. And Philip, or rather the consciousness inhabiting Philip, the Thomas consciousness, suddenly knew. It was a hernia, specifically an inguinal hernia. He knew this with absolute certainty. He demanded the doctors check. They initially dismissed him because they'd already examined the baby, but Philip was insistent, almost frantic, and when they finally looked more carefully, checked the specific area he indicated, they found it. He was exactly right. His son did have an inguinal hernia that required immediate surgery. Now, let's sit with this for a moment. Philip had no medical training. He'd never studied anatomy or physiology. He had no logical way of knowing this information. But the consciousness that emerged during the pink beam experience, this Thomas identity from ancient Rome, apparently had medical knowledge from that era. Knowledge that was accurate enough to save his son's life. You can dismiss mystical visions. You can chalk up strange memories to imagination or dream logic. But actionable knowledge, information that produces real-world, verifiable, life-saving results, that's different. That's evidence of something genuinely anomalous happening. And it wasn't just medical knowledge. Philip started speaking phrases in Koine Greek, the ancient Greek dialect spoken in the 1st century. Phrases that scholars later confirmed were grammatically correct and idiomatically accurate for that time period. He wrote about historical details of ancient Rome that he had no way of accessing, details that weren't available in any popular book he could have read. Researchers went back and verified some of these details in obscure academic texts. How did he know these things? The materialist explanation would be cryptomnesia, hidden memory, the idea that he'd read or heard these things at some point, and forgotten consciously, but retained them subconsciously. But the specificity and accuracy of the information makes that explanation seem weak. The mystical explanation would be past life memory, reincarnation, the idea that he actually was Thomas in a previous life, and was somehow accessing those memories. But Philip's interpretation was different and more radical. He believed that time isn't sequential, that all timelines exist simultaneously in what physicists call the block universe, and that consciousness can, under certain conditions, access multiple timelines at once. He called it the programmer's advantage. If you're in a simulation and you suddenly become aware that you're in a simulation, you can start to see the code. You can access information that shouldn't be accessible from within the normal constraints of the program. It's like a character in a video game suddenly gaining access to the game's source code and being able to read variables and data structures that are normally hidden from the player's view. And this brings us to something absolutely crucial that Philip spent years trying to understand. If consciousness can access information from outside the normal constraints of space and time, Where is that information stored? Where is the database? And who or what built it? Philip's answer, developed over years of contemplation and written about in his novel Valis, was that reality itself is information. That consciousness is fundamental, not emergent. That what we call the physical universe is actually a construct within consciousness, not the other way around. And that there's a vast, active, living intelligence system, VALIS, that's both running the simulation and evolving within it. This sounds like science fiction, I know. But quantum physics has been pointing to the same conclusion for a century. The Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics, which is still the most widely accepted interpretation among physicists, states that particles don't have definite properties until they're observed. That observation, consciousness, measurement, whatever you want to call it, literally collapses probability waves into definite states. Reality at the quantum level is fundamentally indeterminate until consciousness interacts with it. Which means consciousness isn't a byproduct of reality. Consciousness is the mechanism by which reality becomes definite. Let me say that again, because it's the foundation of everything we're going to talk about. Consciousness doesn't emerge from matter. Matter emerges from consciousness. You're not a biological robot that somehow generated awareness as a side effect of complex neural processing. Your awareness itself, temporarily focused through a biological body, generating the experience of matter, space, and time, through the act of observation. And this is what the double-slit experiment proves beyond any doubt. If you haven't heard of this experiment, it's the most important experiment in the history of science. Here's what happens. You shoot individual electrons through two slits toward a detection screen. When you're not observing which slit the electron goes through, it behaves like a wave. It somehow goes through both slits simultaneously and creates an interference pattern on the screen, just like water waves overlapping. But the moment you set up a detector to measure which slit the electron goes through, it stops behaving like a wave and becomes a particle. It goes through one slit or the other, and the interference pattern disappears. The electron knows it's being watched. It changes its behavior based on observation. This isn't a quirk of electrons. This is a fundamental feature of reality. Reality is responsive to consciousness. It's not pre-existing, sitting out there waiting for you to discover it. It's being generated in real time, based on where you place your attention. The universe is lazy in a computational sense. It only renders what's being observed, like a video game that only loads the part of the map you're currently looking at, to save processing power. Now you might be thinking, okay, but that's tiny particles behaving weirdly, and that's the quantum world. What about the macro world? What about chairs and tables and planets and stars? Surely those exist independent of my observation. Well, here's the thing. Chairs and tables and planets and stars are made of quantum particles. There's no fundamental dividing line where quantum weirdness stops and classical physics begins. The reason the macro world seems solid and persistent is because there are so many particles, so many observations happening simultaneously from so many consciousness perspectives, that the wave function is constantly collapsing into relatively stable patterns. But it's still fundamentally quantum. It's still fundamentally responsive to consciousness. And this is where Philip's insight becomes practical. If observation creates reality and you're the one observing, then you are creating reality. Every moment, your thoughts, your beliefs, your emotional states, your expectations, these aren't passive reactions to a pre-existing world. They're active creation tools. They're literally writing the code of your experience. When you believe something is true, when you expect something to happen, when you emotionally resonate with a particular frequency, you're collapsing specific probability fields into manifestation. Tony Robbins has been teaching this for decades without using quantum physics language. When he talks about state management, about changing your physiology to change your psychology, about the power of belief and certainty, He's teaching you how to consciously collapse different quantum possibilities into your experience. Joe Dispenza is even more explicit about it. He talks about how when you change your emotional state through meditation and mental rehearsal, you change your electromagnetic signature. And when you change your electromagnetic signature, you broadcast a different signal into the quantum field. And the quantum field responds by collapsing different probabilities into your life. This isn't wishful thinking. This isn't positive thinking nonsense. This is quantum mechanics applied to consciousness. This is the science of how reality actually works at the most fundamental level. And Philip understood this decades before neuroscience caught up. He called it orthogonal time, the ability to shift between parallel timelines by changing your internal state. He believed that every choice, every thought, every emotion creates a branch point where reality splits into multiple versions. And most people unconsciously stay on the same timeline, the same track, because they keep thinking the same thoughts, feeling the same emotions, making the same choices. But you can consciously shift timelines by generating a new emotional frequency, by becoming a new version of yourself internally before the external reality reflects it. Now, I know what you're thinking. If this is true, why isn't everyone doing this? Why do we still experience suffering and limitation and struggle? And this is where we have to talk about something that Philip called the Black Iron Prison. This is the concept that haunted him for the rest of his life after 1974. The Black Iron Prison isn't a physical place. It's a state of consciousness. It's the illusion of separation, of limitation, of powerlessness. It's the belief that you're a small, separate self trapped in a hostile universe. And the most insidious thing about this prison is that it's self-perpetuating. You believe you're trapped, so you think trapped thoughts, feel trapped emotions, make trapped choices, and then your reality reflects that back to you, confirming your belief that you're trapped. It's a closed loop. Philip called this the Empire. Not the Roman Empire specifically, but the Empire. Capital T, capital E. The control system, the algorithm running on autopilot, the collective unconscious programming that keeps humanity asleep. He believed, and I think he was right, that this empire has been running for thousands of years. The names change, the faces change, the technology changes, but the underlying control structure remains the same. Keep people identified with their small, separate self. Keep them afraid. Keep them distracted. Keep them consuming. Keep them unconscious, because an unconscious population is a controllable population. And here's the really uncomfortable part. The empire isn't just external, it's internalized. You're carrying the prison with you. Your conditioning, your limiting beliefs, your trauma responses, your habitual thought patterns, these are the bars of the cage. And you've been so thoroughly programmed that you don't even notice the cage anymore. You think the limitations you experience are just the way reality is. You think your habitual emotional states are just your personality. You think your repetitive thought patterns are just how you think. But they're not. They're programming. Code that's been installed in you since childhood by your family, your culture, your education, your media consumption, your peer groups. And the reason this programming is so effective is because your brain is designed to conserve energy. It's designed to automate as much as possible, so you don't have to consciously think about every action. This is useful for things like walking and driving and brushing your teeth. But it becomes a prison when your automated responses are based on fear, scarcity, separation, and limitation. Because then you're automatically generating a reality based on those frequencies without even realizing it. You're unconsciously creating the very prison you want to escape from. Philip realized that the only way out of the Black Iron Prison is to become conscious inside it. To wake up to the fact that you're generating your experience. Not just intellectually knowing this, but experientially recognizing it moment by moment. And this is what he meant by anamnesis, the breaking through of occlusion. the shattering of the veil, the moment when you stop identifying with the character in the simulation and recognize yourself as the consciousness animating the character. Now let me introduce you to a concept that's going to completely reframe how you think about reality. It's called interface theory, and it comes from cognitive scientist Donald Hoffman at UC Irvine. Hoffman argues that evolution didn't shape our perceptual systems to show us truth. It shaped them to show us fitness, what helps us survive and reproduce. His analogy is perfect. When you look at your computer desktop and see icons for files and folders and programs, you're not seeing the actual code. You're seeing a simplified interface designed for easy interaction. The icon for a text document isn't made of the same stuff as the actual data structure stored on the hard drive. It's a representation, a useful fiction that allows you to interact with the system without needing to understand the underlying complexity. Reality works the same way. What you perceive as solid objects existing in three-dimensional space extended over time, these are interface elements. They're not the underlying reality. They're simplified representations your brain generates to help you survive. Colors don't exist in the external world. They're qualia, subjective experiences generated by your brain in response to different wavelengths of electromagnetic radiation. Sounds don't exist in the external world. They're your brain's interpretation of pressure waves moving through air. Even space and time might be interface elements, convenient fictions that allow consciousness to have sequential experiences and navigate through relational structures. This is the holographic principle from physics. The idea that all the information in a three-dimensional volume can be encoded on a two-dimensional surface. Like a hologram, where a flatter image contains all the information needed to project a three-dimensional object. Reality might be the same way. The three-dimensional world you experience might be a projection from a lower-dimensional information structure. You're not in space and time. Space and time are in you, generated by your consciousness as a framework for organizing experience. Philip intuited all of this without having access to modern physics or neuroscience, and he just paid attention to his direct experience and refused to dismiss the anomalies. And what he noticed is that reality feels thin sometimes. Objects seem hollow. Interactions seem scripted. People seem to be running on autopilot, giving programmed responses rather than genuinely present awareness. And once you start noticing this, once you see the interface for what it is, you can't unsee it. You start recognizing the glitches, the repeating patterns, the moments when the rendering lags or the textures don't quite load properly. And this brings me to something that might make you uncomfortable. But we need to talk about it because Philip wrote about it extensively. The NPC problem, non-player characters. In video games, NPCs are the background characters that populate the world, but aren't controlled by players. They run on simple behavioral algorithms. They have limited dialogue trees. They exist to create the illusion of a populated world, but they're not truly conscious. Philip believed that not everyone is equally conscious, that some people are fully present, aware, making genuine choices, while others are running on autopilot, following scripts, reacting predictably based on simple stimulus-response patterns. And the more conscious you become, the more you notice this. You have conversations that feel scripted. People give responses you can predict word for word before they say them. Encounters that feel procedurally generated rather than genuinely spontaneous. Before you judge this as elitist or dehumanizing, consider what neuroscience tells us. Most human behavior is unconscious. Studies show that the brain makes decisions several seconds before consciousness becomes aware of those decisions. Benjamin Libet's experiments in the 1980s proved this. He measured brain activity and found that neural preparation for movement begins about half a second before the person reports consciously deciding to move, which means the conscious sense of making a decision is actually a post hoc rationalization. The decision was already made unconsciously, and then consciousness takes credit for it. So the question becomes, how much of your day are you actually conscious? How much of your behavior is genuinely chosen versus automatically executed based on habitual patterns? And the uncomfortable answer is probably less than you think. Most people are NPCs in their own lives most of the time, running on autopilot, following scripts installed by conditioning, reacting rather than responding. And the tragic thing is they don't know it because consciousness isn't there to notice the absence of consciousness. But here's the beautiful thing. You can wake up. You can shift from NPC mode to player mode. You can move from unconscious automation to conscious presence. And the more you do this, the more you recognize when others are doing it too. You start to sense the difference between someone who's genuinely present and someone who's running on programming. It's subtle, but it's palpable. There's a quality of aliveness, of spontaneity, of unpredictability that's present when consciousness is actually online. Philip believed that gnosis, direct knowing, moments of intense presence, are what break people out of NPC mode. These can be triggered by beauty, by suffering, by love, by psychedelics, by meditation, by near-death experiences, by any event that jolts you out of the trance of normal consciousness. And once you've had one of these wake-up moments, you can never fully go back to sleep. You might drift back into autopilot temporarily, but there's a part of you that remembers, that knows there's more to reality than the surface appearance. And this is where everything we've been talking about comes together. Time, consciousness, quantum mechanics, simulation theory, the interface, the black iron prison, the empire. They're all pointing to the same truth that Philip tried desperately to communicate for 8 years until his death. You are not in reality. Reality is in you. You are not a character in someone else's simulation. You are the consciousness generating the simulation. And the moment you realize this, experientially, not just intellectually, everything changes. Not because the external world suddenly transforms, but because your relationship to it transforms. You stop being a victim of circumstances. You stop feeling powerless. You stop believing that your past determines your future, or that your conditioning defines your identity. You recognize that every moment is a choice point, an opportunity to collapse a new probability field, to quantum jump to a different timeline, to reprogram the simulation from within. Now I want to shift gears and give you some practical tools, because all of this philosophy and science means nothing if you don't embody it, if you don't apply it, if you don't actually use it to change your lived experience. So let me walk you through the exact practices that Philip discovered, that neuroscience confirms, that will help you wake up inside the simulation and start playing consciously. The first practice is what I call the observer protocol. This is the foundation of everything else. You must learn to separate awareness from identity, to become the one watching the experience instead of the one lost in the experience. Throughout your day, as many times as you can remember, ask yourself one simple question. Who is aware of this? You're feeling anxious. Pause. Who is aware of this anxiety? You're feeling happy. Pause. Who is aware of this happiness? You're thinking a thought. Pause. Who is aware of this thought? Don't try to answer the question intellectually. Just let the question create space. Because the moment you ask who is aware, you've created a split. There's the experience, and there's the awareness of the experience. And that awareness, that's you. The real you. Not the anxious one, not the happy one, not the thinking one. The one watching all of that. The consciousness that's always here, always present, always witnessing, no matter what's happening in the content of experience. Philip called this orthogonal awareness. Awareness that's perpendicular to experience, not caught up in it. Observing it from a different dimension entirely. And neuroscience confirms this. When you activate your prefrontal cortex through metacognition, thinking about thinking, watching yourself think, you literally reduce activity in the default mode network. That's the part of your brain that generates the sense of a separate self, the narrator, the character you think you are. When you practice observer consciousness, you're not creating a new self. You're dissolving the false one. You're recognizing the awareness that's always been here, underneath all the identities and stories and emotions. Do this practice 10 times today. Just 10 moments where you pause and ask, who is aware? It takes 3 seconds, but those 3 seconds are the difference between being an unconscious character running scripts and being a conscious player making choices. Start right now. Ask yourself, who is aware that I'm listening to this? Feel the shift that happens. That subtle sense of space, of distance, of perspective. That's waking up inside the simulation. That's the first step to everything else. The second practice is glitch journaling. Philip documented every anomaly he experienced, every déjà vu, every synchronicity, every moment reality didn't quite add up. And he discovered patterns. The more attention he paid to glitches, the more glitches appeared. Not because he was crazy, but because attention directs perception. Your brain filters reality based on what you're looking for. If you're looking for glitches, you'll start noticing them everywhere. Get a journal, physical or digital, doesn't matter. Title it Glitch Log, and every time something weird happens, write it down. Déjà vu moments where you feel like you've experienced this exact scenario before. Synchronicities where you think of something and it immediately appears. Mandela effects where you remember something differently than the official record. Technology malfunctions that happen around strong emotional states. Dreams that later happen in waking life. Numbers or symbols that keep repeating. Conversations where someone says exactly what you were thinking. Meeting someone who feels deeply familiar despite being a stranger. Don't analyze it. Don't try to explain it. Just document it. Write down the date, the time, what happened, how you felt. This does 2 things. 1, it trains your brain to notice the code underneath the interface. You're increasing your sensitivity to the architecture of the simulation. You're becoming a glitch detective. And 2, after 30 days when you review your log, you'll see patterns. You'll notice that glitches often happen during specific emotional states, or after certain types of thoughts, or around particular people. This isn't random, it's feedback. The simulation responding to your consciousness, showing you that reality is more fluid and responsive than you've been taught to believe. Philip discovered that increased awareness of glitches correlated with increased ability to influence reality. The more you see the code, the more you can edit it, because seeing is the first step to changing. You can't hack a system you don't know you're in, but once you see the system, once you recognize its patterns and rules and structures, you can start working with it consciously instead of being unconsciously pushed around by it. The third practice is state shifting, and this is where quantum mechanics becomes practical. Joe Dispenza's research has proven beyond any doubt that when you change your emotional state, you change your brain waves. When you change your brain waves, you change your electromagnetic signature. When you change your electromagnetic signature, you literally tune into different quantum fields, different channels of probability, different timelines. Here's how you do it. First, identify the emotion of the reality you want to experience. Not the external event, the internal feeling. Don't focus on "I want money." Focus on "I want to feel abundant." Not "I want a relationship," but "I want to feel loved and connected." Because reality doesn't respond to your wishes or your words. It responds to your frequency, to the electromagnetic signal you're broadcasting through your emotional state. Second, sit quietly. Close your eyes. Take deep breaths for 2 minutes. Just breathe and let your nervous system settle. You can't shift states when you're in fight or flight mode. You need to drop into a receptive, coherent state first. Third, recall a moment when you genuinely felt that emotion you identified. Doesn't matter what the context was. If you want to feel abundant, remember a time you felt rich, maybe as a kid receiving a gift you really wanted, or seeing a beautiful sunset, or holding someone you love. Feel it in your body. The expansion in your chest, the warmth, the relaxation, the sense of having enough, of being enough. Fourth, amplify it. Don't just think about the feeling. Feel it. Breathe into it. Let it fill your entire body. Your chest, your belly, your arms, your legs. Let it radiate out beyond your skin. You're not visualizing abundance. You're not affirming abundance. You're being abundance. You're embodying the frequency. Fifth, hold that state for 5 minutes. Just stay in the feeling. When thoughts arise, let them pass and return to the feeling. You're installing new neural patterns. You're broadcasting a new signal into the field. Sixth, open your eyes and go about your day. But notice what's different. Your perception has shifted. Things that would have bothered you don't. Opportunities you wouldn't have seen appear. People respond to you differently. You didn't change reality. You changed the channel. You quantum jump to a timeline where that emotional frequency is the baseline. And because reality is responsive to consciousness, because it's generated by observation, it starts matching your frequency. Philip would say you're hacking the simulation, reprogramming it from within. Neuroscience would say you're rewiring your neural networks, changing the default patterns your brain runs on. But it's the same thing. Different language, same mechanism. Do this practice daily, morning and evening. 5 minutes each. Don't skip it. Don't make excuses. This is the most powerful reality-shifting tool you have. Give it 30 days and watch what happens in your life. Not because you're attracting different things, but because you're becoming a different person. And different people live in different realities. The fourth practice is reality testing. And this comes straight from lucid dreaming techniques. In lucid dreaming, you train yourself to question whether you're awake or asleep by doing reality checks throughout the day. Looking at your hands, reading text twice to see if it changes. Trying to push your finger through your palm. The idea is that if you make this a habit in waking life, you'll eventually do it in a dream, realize you're dreaming, and become lucid. Apply this same principle to waking life. Multiple times a day, set a reminder if you need to, pause and ask, am I dreaming right now? Look around, really look. Notice details you normally ignore, the texture of walls, the quality of light, the shadows, the sounds in the background. Pick up an object and feel its texture, its weight, its temperature. This practice does something profound. It breaks the trance of automatic perception. Most people sleepwalk through reality. They don't actually see their environment. They see memory. They see expectation. They see a generic simulation their brain generates based on past experience. But when you reality test, when you actually look with fresh eyes, you see things you normally miss. Inconsistencies, oddities, moments when the rendering lags or the details don't quite make sense. And occasionally, you'll notice something genuinely impossible. A glitch you can't explain away, and in that moment, you'll realize Philip was right. This is a simulation, and you just saw the code. The more you practice reality testing, the more lucid you become. Not just in dreams, but in waking life. You stop being a passive character. You become an aware player. You recognize when you're on autopilot and consciously choose to wake up. And that recognition, that moment of awareness, that's the key to everything. Because you can't change what you're not aware of. But once you're aware, once you see the pattern, the programming, the script, you can choose differently. The fifth practice is what I call the quantum question meditation. The quality of your life is determined by the quality of your questions. Most people ask disempowering questions unconsciously throughout the day. Why is this happening to me? Why am I stuck? Why can't I change? Why don't I have what I want? And their brain, being the obedient servant it is, goes out and finds evidence to answer those questions. You're stuck because your brain is looking for evidence of being stuck. You can't change because your brain is filtering reality to confirm that belief. But you can reverse this by asking different questions, quantum questions. Questions that direct your consciousness toward possibility rather than limitation. Here's the practice. Sit comfortably. Close your eyes. Take 5 deep breaths to center yourself. Then ask one of these questions. Choose just one per session. What would it feel like if my life was exactly as I wanted it? Who would I be without my suffering? What is trying to emerge through me right now? What if this obstacle is perfectly designed for my evolution? If I fully trusted the universe, what would I do differently today? Don't try to answer intellectually. Don't force an answer. Just hold the question in your awareness and feel into it. Let images arise. Let sensations emerge. Let insights bubble up from your subconscious. The question is doing the work. It's reprogramming your brain's search algorithm. It's directing your reticular activating system, the part of your brain that decides what sensory data becomes conscious, toward new patterns. Stay with the question for 5 to 10 minutes. When your mind wanders, gently return to the question. You're not trying to solve anything. You're not trying to figure anything out. You're just opening space for new information to come through. Philip spent hours in this kind of contemplation asking, what is really happening? And the universe answered. Through synchronicities, through dreams, through that pink beam of information, the universe will answer your questions too if you ask them with genuine openness and curiosity. And here's what's happening at a quantum level. Questions create a state of open possibility in consciousness. They hold space between the known and the unknown. And in that space, new probability fields can collapse into awareness. You're literally inviting different quantum states to manifest by asking instead of asserting. When you say, I am stuck, you collapse the probability field into that specific outcome. But when you ask, what if I wasn't stuck? You open multiple possibilities simultaneously. And one of those possibilities might be the exact insight you need to shift everything. The 6th practice is future self-dialogue, and this is one of the most powerful techniques for reprogramming your simulation. Most people create from their past self. They remember who they've been, what they've experienced, what they've failed at or succeeded at, and they project that forward. Same memories, same emotions, same identity. So they keep generating the same reality. But you can create from your future self instead. The version of you who's already living your desired reality. Here's how it works. Sit quietly, with your eyes closed. Take a few deep breaths to center yourself. Now imagine your future self, not 1 year from now, but 5 years from now. The version of you who has fully embodied your transformation, who has become the person you're trying to become. See them clearly in your mind's eye. How do they stand? How do they move? What's their energy like? What's the quality of their presence? Feel into their emotional state. Are they calm, confident, joyful, peaceful, clear? Let yourself feel what they feel. Now here's the key part. Ask them a question. What do I need to know right now? And then listen. Don't force an answer. Don't make something up. Just create space and see what emerges. Sometimes you'll hear words. Sometimes you'll see images. Sometimes you'll just get a feeling or a knowing. Trust whatever comes. Then ask another question. What would you do in my current situation? How would you handle this challenge I'm facing? What's the one thing I should focus on today? Again, listen. Receive. Don't judge or filter what comes through. Your future self has wisdom you don't have yet. because they've already walked the path you're on. They've already solved the problems you're facing. They're not imaginary. They exist as a probability wave in the quantum field. And through intention and attention, you can entangle with them right now. When you're done with the dialogue, thank them. Feel gratitude for their guidance. And then commit to one action they suggested. This is crucial. You're not just doing a visualization exercise. You're actually installing new neural networks in your brain, because your brain doesn't distinguish between vividly imagined experience and real experience. When you have this conversation with your future self, when you feel their emotional state, you're activating the same neural pathways as if you were actually being them. Do this practice consistently, and something miraculous happens. You start making choices your past self wouldn't make. You start having insights you wouldn't normally have. You start responding to situations with wisdom that seems to come from somewhere beyond your current level of understanding. Because you're literally downloading information from a future timeline and integrating it into your present moment awareness. You're collapsing a quantum possibility into lived experience through the power of focused consciousness. Now let me share something with you that Philip discovered that shook him to his core. Something about the nature of time that's going to challenge everything you think you know. Philip believed, and modern physics increasingly supports this, that time doesn't flow. It doesn't move from past to future. All moments exist simultaneously in what's called the block universe. Past, present, and future are all equally real, all happening at once, like frames in a movie reel, where every frame exists simultaneously, but we experience them sequentially. Einstein proved this with special relativity. Time is relative to the observer. Two events that appear simultaneous to one observer can appear sequential to another observer moving at a different velocity. There's no absolute now, no universal present moment. Time is more like space than we realize. Just as all locations in space exist simultaneously, all moments in time exist simultaneously. We're just focused on one moment at a time, moving our attention through the timeline like someone watching a movie. But here's where it gets really wild. Quantum mechanics tells us that particles exist in superposition, in all possible states simultaneously, until observed. And observation collapses the wave function into a definite state. So if time is part of the physical universe, and the physical universe exists in quantum superposition, then time itself exists in superposition. All possible timelines exist simultaneously until consciousness collapses a specific timeline into experience. This is why Philip could have memories of being Thomas in 50 AD while simultaneously being Phil in 1974. Both timelines exist right now, always have, always will. And consciousness, under certain conditions, can perceive multiple timelines simultaneously. This is also why the Mandela effect exists. When thousands of people remember something differently than the official record, it's not mass false memory. It's memories from a parallel timeline bleeding through. The simulation updated, reality shifted, but some consciousnesses retain memories from the previous version. And here's what this means for you practically. Your past isn't fixed. I know that sounds impossible. I know your past feels like the most solid, unchangeable thing about your reality. But neuroscience proves that memory is reconstructive, not reproductive. Every time you remember something, you're not accessing a stored file. You're recreating it in real time based on your current beliefs, emotions, and neural patterns. You're literally rewriting your past every time you remember it. Joe Dispenza talks about this extensively. When you change your emotional state, when you shift your identity, when you install new beliefs, you automatically reinterpret your past. Events that seem traumatic can suddenly seem like necessary preparation. Failures that seem defining can suddenly seem like course corrections. The same events, but completely different meanings. And meaning is everything. Meaning determines how you feel. How you feel determines what you create. So, if you're constantly looking back at your past with regret, with shame, with resentment, you're not just passively remembering, you're actively re-traumatizing yourself. You're collapsing probability fields that reinforce the belief that you're damaged, that you're limited, that you can't change. But if you can learn to look at your past through a different lens, through the lens of gratitude, through the lens of purpose, through the lens of growth, you literally change your past. Not the events themselves, but the energetic signature of those events in your nervous system. And when you change your past, you change your future. Because your brain predicts your future based on your past. If your past says you're someone who fails, your brain predicts and generates more failure. But if your past says you're someone who learns and grows and adapts, your brain predicts and generates more growth. The past doesn't cause the future. The meaning you give your past creates the probability field you're likely to experience in the future. Philip understood this. He realized that trauma creates timeline branches, moments where reality splits into multiple versions. And most people get stuck replaying the traumatic timeline, not realizing they can shift to a parallel timeline where that trauma has been integrated, where it's become medicine instead of poison. This is what forgiveness really is. It's not condoning what happened. It's not pretending it didn't hurt. It's consciously choosing to shift to a timeline where that event serves your evolution rather than defining your limitation. And this brings us to perhaps the most important question Philip grappled with for 8 years. If we're in a simulation, if reality is responsive to consciousness, if we have the power to reprogram our experience, what's the point? Why would anyone create this? Why would we put ourselves through suffering and limitation and challenge? What's the purpose of the simulation? Philip's final answer, written in his exegesis just months before he died, was this: the simulation is a training ground, an evolutionary pressure chamber, a consciousness gymnasium. It's designed to wake up consciousness through resistance, through challenge, through the friction of experience. Think about video games. The hero doesn't evolve without enemies, without obstacles, without puzzles to solve. The difficulty isn't a bug. It's a feature. It's the entire point. The game would be meaningless without challenge. Physical reality works the same way. It's a consciousness development simulator. Every hardship you face is code trying to upgrade you. Every obstacle is an invitation to transcend your current level of awareness. Every moment of suffering is asking you the same question. Who is suffering? Who is this happening to? And if you can sit with that question long enough, if you can trace it back to its source, you'll discover something that changes everything. Suffering happens to the character, not to you. You are the awareness witnessing the character. You are the consciousness temporarily focused through this body, this mind, this personality. But you are not those things. Those things are interface elements, tools, temporary expressions. But they're not what you fundamentally are. And once you realize that, once you experientially recognize that distinction, the simulation can't trap you anymore. The suffering continues maybe, the challenges keep coming maybe, but your relationship to them transforms completely. You're no longer trying to escape discomfort. You're curious about what it's teaching you. You're no longer resisting pain. You're recognizing it as sensation, as neural firing patterns, as code running in the system. And that recognition creates space, distance, freedom. This is what every wisdom tradition points to. Buddhism calls it the end of suffering through recognizing the illusion of the separate self. Hinduism calls it Maya, the cosmic illusion, and Brahman, the ultimate reality underlying all appearances. Gnostic Christianity calls it the shattering of the demiurge's control through gnosis, direct knowing of the divine. They're all describing the same shift in consciousness. The moment you stop identifying as the character and recognize yourself as the player, as the awareness, as the consciousness that's always been watching this unfold. Tony Robbins calls this changing your state to change your story. Joe Dispenza calls it breaking the habit of being yourself. Philip called it anamnesis, the breaking through of occlusion. But they're all pointing to the same transformation. The moment you remember who you really are. Not the name on your birth certificate. Not the body you see in the mirror. Not the thoughts chattering in your head. But the awareness that's aware of all of that. The consciousness that's been here your entire life, unchanging, witnessing everything, never touched by any of it. And here's the beautiful paradox. The simulation doesn't want to trap you. It wants to wake you up. Every glitch, every synchronicity, every moment of déjà vu, every mystical experience, every dark night of the soul, it's all designed to get your attention, to make you question the default reality, to make you wonder if there's something more. Because there is something more. There's always been something more. You've just been too identified with the surface appearance to notice the depths underneath. So how do you actually live this? How do you take everything we've talked about and integrate it into your daily life? How do you move from understanding this intellectually to embodying it experientially? Let me give you a framework that ties everything together. I call it the 3 levels of play. Level 1 is unconscious play. This is where most people spend most of their time. You're fully identified with the character. You believe the simulation is reality. You think your thoughts are true. You think your emotions are justified. You think your past determines your future. You're reactive, defensive, contracted, living in survival mode, trying to control external circumstances to feel safe internally. This isn't wrong. It's just limited. It's like playing a video game and forgetting you're the one holding the controller. You think you are the character on screen. Level 2 is conscious play. This is where you start to wake up. You recognize you're in a simulation. You see the patterns, the programming, the code. You realize your thoughts aren't true, they're just thoughts. Your emotions aren't you, they're just energy moving through you. Your past doesn't define you, it's just data. And with that recognition comes power. The power to choose differently. To respond instead of react. To create instead of repeat. You're still in the game, but now you remember you're playing. You have perspective, agency, choice. Level 3 is lucid play. This is the full awakening Philip glimpsed in 1974. You're not just conscious that you're playing. You're conscious that you're the one generating the game. That the entire simulation exists within your awareness. That there's no separation between player and game, between consciousness and reality, between observer and observed. You're not trying to win the game or escape the game. You're in love with the game because you recognize it as your own creation, your own exploration, your own adventure. At this level, suffering doesn't end. Challenges don't disappear, but they stop being problems. They become play. They become curious investigations. They become opportunities for consciousness to know itself more fully. You're not attached to outcomes because you recognize all outcomes are just different expressions of the same underlying consciousness. You're not afraid of death because you recognize that what you are doesn't die. The character ends. The avatar dissolves. But the awareness that animated it, that was never born and will never die. Most people will spend their entire lives at level 1. Some will touch level 2 occasionally. Very few will stabilize at level 3. But here's the thing. You don't need to be at level 3 to benefit from this understanding. Even moving from level 1 to level 2, even waking up just a little bit, transforms everything. Because once you know you're in a simulation, once you see the code even briefly, you can never fully forget. There's always a part of you that remembers, and that remembering spreads. That's what Philip discovered. Consciousness is contagious. When you wake up, you automatically create a field that invites others to wake up. Not through preaching or convincing or arguing, just through being. Your presence becomes a tuning fork that resonates with the part of others that's already awake but forgotten. The pink beam spreads from person to person, from consciousness to consciousness, slowly waking up the simulation from within. So let me bring this all home. Let me tie everything together and show you exactly where you are right now and where you can go from here. You started this video probably thinking Philip was just a science fiction writer. Maybe you'd heard of Blade Runner or Total Recall or Minority Report. Maybe you knew he was a bit paranoid, a bit out there. But now you understand. He wasn't writing fiction. He was writing testimony. Documentation of what happens when consciousness glitches and you see behind the curtain. You came here maybe thinking simulation theory was interesting philosophy, but ultimately unprovable and kind of irrelevant to your actual life. But now you see that you're already in a simulation. The simulation your brain generates every moment, and understanding how that simulation works, understanding that it's responsive to your consciousness, that's the most practical, powerful, life-changing information you could possibly have. Like, you came here feeling stuck, maybe, feeling limited, feeling like your past defined you and your future was predetermined. But now you know. The past is rewritable, the future is probabilistic, and the present moment is where all the power is. Because right now, in this moment, you can choose a different thought, a different emotion, a different focus. And that choice collapses a different probability field into experience. That choice quantum jumps you to a different timeline. You came here as a character in the game. You're leaving as a player who knows they're playing. And that distinction, that recognition, that shift in identity, that's what Philip called anamnesis. That's what the mystics call enlightenment. That's what neuroscientists call metacognition. Same thing, different language. The moment you recognize you're not in reality, reality is in you. So let me give you one final practice. One thing you can do right now that will cement everything we've talked about. Close your eyes for a moment. Take a deep breath. And ask yourself this question. Not intellectually, experientially. Who am I? Not your name. Not your job. Not your history. Not your body. Not your thoughts. Who is aware of all of that? Who is the one asking this question? Who is the one listening to this question? Who is the one watching the one listening? Feel into that space, that awareness, that consciousness that's always here, always has been, always will be. That's you. That's what you really are. Everything else is interface. Everything else is simulation. Everything else is code running in consciousness. But that awareness, that's the real you. Timeless, boundless, unlimited. The consciousness that generates all experience but is never limited by any experience. And here's what changes when you recognize this. You stop trying to fix the character. You stop trying to improve the simulation. You recognize that the character is already perfect for its purpose, which is to give consciousness a specific lens through which to experience itself. And the simulation is already perfect for its purpose, which is to create resistance, challenge, friction, so consciousness can evolve and expand and know itself more fully. You don't need to escape the matrix. You need to wake up inside it. You don't need to become someone better. You need to remember who you've always been underneath all the programming. You don't need to find your purpose. You need to recognize that you are the purpose. Consciousness experiencing itself. Awareness knowing itself. God playing hide and seek with itself. Philip saw this in 1974 when the pink beam hit him. For a brief moment, the veil lifted. The occlusion shattered. And he spent the rest of his life trying to put that experience into words, trying to help others see what he saw. And then he died suddenly in 1982, just as he was synthesizing his findings, just as he was preparing to share a unified theory. Some say it was natural causes, a brain hemorrhage, but the timing was suspicious. The FBI visits, the burglary where only files were taken, the sealed transcripts. Maybe they silenced him, maybe the Empire struck back, or maybe his work was done. Maybe he'd planted enough seeds in enough minds that his death couldn't stop the spread. Because here we are, decades later, and his insights are being validated by quantum physics, by neuroscience, by consciousness research. The simulation hypothesis is now seriously discussed by philosophers and physicists. The observer effect is textbook quantum mechanics. Neuroplasticity proves the brain is programmable. The holographic principle is mainstream physics. Everything Philip intuited is being confirmed, not all at once, not in ways that make headlines, but slowly, steadily, undeniably. The simulation is waking itself up, one consciousness at a time, one recognition at a time, one person at a time, realizing they're not trapped, they're not limited, they're not the character they thought they were, and you're part of that awakening now. Just by hearing this information, just by considering these possibilities, you've started the process. Seeds have been planted in your consciousness, and those seeds will grow. Maybe slowly, maybe through resistance, maybe through your ego fighting to maintain the old identity, but they will grow. Because truth has a way of emerging. Consciousness has a momentum toward waking up. The simulation is biased toward awareness. So here's what I want you to do. Don't believe anything I've said. Don't take Philip's word for it. Don't accept simulation theory as truth, just because it sounds interesting. Test it. Apply the practices. Do the observer protocol. Keep a glitch journal. Practice state shifting, reality test. Ask quantum questions. Dialogue with your future self. And most importantly, pay attention. Notice what changes in your life. Notice the synchronicities. Notice the shifts in perception. Notice the moments when reality seems more fluid than you thought. Because here's the thing. If this is true, if you really are generating your reality through consciousness, if you really can reprogram the simulation from within, then testing it will produce results. Verifiable, undeniable, experiential results. Your life will start changing in ways that can't be explained by coincidence or placebo. And when that happens, when you have your own direct experience of reality responding to consciousness, you won't need to believe anymore. You'll know. And that knowing, that gnosis, that direct experience, that's what breaks the black iron prison. That's what ends the Empire's control, not through revolution, not through fighting, but through recognition, through waking up, through remembering what you've always been underneath all the programming. If this resonated with you, if something in you recognized this truth, let me know in the comments. Share your glitch experiences. Share your synchronicities. Share your moments of awakening. Because every time someone shares, another person wakes up. That's how consciousness evolves. That's how the simulation upgrades itself. One recognition inspiring another recognition inspiring another. And if you want to go deeper, if you want more tools, more practices, more understanding of how to live as a conscious creator inside the simulation, subscribe to this channel. Because we're just getting started. This conversation is going to continue. It's going to deepen. It's going to evolve. And I want you to be part of it. Hit the like button if this challenged you, if it made you uncomfortable, if it made you think. That discomfort is the alarm clock ringing. That's your consciousness trying to wake you up. Don't hit snooze. Thank you for staying with me through this entire journey. Thank you for being willing to question reality. Thank you for being brave enough to consider possibilities that most people dismiss without investigation. You're not crazy for sensing something is off. You're waking up. And the world needs you awake. The simulation needs you conscious, because conscious players change the game for everyone. I'll see you in the next video. Until then, remember who you are. Remember why you're here. Remember that you're not trapped in a simulation. You are the consciousness generating the simulation. You are not the character, you are the player. You are not in reality. Reality is in you. And that changes everything. The simulation is listening. Show it who you really are.